So, in the Kronk Gym, for viewers listening and aren't aware of who was in the gym whilst you were training there, so who are some of the big names from Kronk that you grew
So
up around watching and
so
training
like
with?
so Kronk was the way that it operated was so Kronk was the boxing gym itself was inside of a recreational center. And so Kronk is famous for two things. It's famous for its fighters and it's famous for its cockroaches. And only people that have been to the gym will understand that. So it's called the Kronk Shake. So if you ever hang your clothes in the locker or your bag or anything that you put in the locker, as soon as you get that clothes out of there, you better start shaking your clothes out, man. Because it was the basement where the gym was located at. It was next to a boiler room. All right. And so it's in a boiler room. You had showers, you had a locker room, and in that locker room, you would walk up about 10 or 15 stairs and you'd go to an Olympic sized swimming pool. So just imagine the type of humidity that was down there. Like
Mm.
it was 100% humidity in that locker room and in that gym like almost every single day, unless if they didn't turn the heat on or if they turned like there were no fans there. And so it's like you're in this room that steam pipes are running through. They're covered in asbestos, which most people don't think about, but it was all covered with asbestos. And I remember when the gym used to be green and like before they painted it the traditional, crown colors, the red and gold. I remember when the gym had this like green and hue tint to it, and then they painted it. And it wasn't until years later I'm like, man, that's asbestos everywhere. We all were inhaling asbestos, working out, killing ourselves. And so the way that it was structured is uh, the pros and the world champions and the competitor and like the heavy competitive boxers, like say Tommy Hearns, Hilmer Kenty, Jimmy Paul, Milton McCroy, like all those guys, and anybody that was training with Emanuel at that time, they came in at about 1 p.m., 12:30, 1 p.m. And those they were the only ones there. There's a handful of guys. Those guys were there. And then at about, I would say 3:30 p.m., that's when like we would show up and there would be like, the after school people would show up. All right. And the gym at that time had Floyd Logan there. And that's a person that I will have to say does not get enough credit for what he did at Kronk while he was there. So everyone talks about Emanuel, how great Emanuel was. Um, and he was good at what he did. But Floyd Logan was the guy that if you came off the street, he was the guy that was going to show you, let's get in front of the mirror, let's get in our boxing stance, let me show you how to throw a jab. Like that was Floyd Logan. He did that for so many people, young and old. He had a massive impact on people in that gym, but he's not famous for it. You understand what I'm saying? Because he was the guy that was grinding there with kids. He was coming from his job he worked at GM. He was coming from his job at GM, getting off his shift, and then coming there to work with kids or adults or the fighters that were just learning how to box or were like in their late teens. He was that guy working day in and day out with anybody that walked in that gym. And he had this little room that was like his office slash locker room that was probably 6 by 10, maybe 2 meters by 3 meters. It was really small. And that's where he kept the equipment. That's where he kept his clothes, and that's where I first learned the Kronk Shake. Whatever is like, I remember him. I will never forget that. He's like, if you put your stuff in the locker, he's like, make sure you shake it. I'm like, why? He's like, because of the cockroaches, man. But and that's a guy that you know he he just doesn't get enough credit. You know what I mean? And you can look him up online, and it's kind of like a travesty, because everybody remembers uh, Emanuel Steward. Everybody remembers like Bill Miller. Like those are the two guys that everybody remembers because Bill Miller was attached to JamesToney. And that's like one of the things I'm like, man, people just don't give enough credit to the guy that was there consistently every day. I can't remember if he ever missed a day. Maybe he took a vacation once in a while, and that was like for a couple of days, but that's what it was. He loved the sport, but he loved helping people more so than anything else. And he's a guy that helped a lot of people, stay off the streets or whatever, and it was crazy to see that. So as those people came in between like 3:30, there was a 3:30 crowd to like 5 o'clock crowd, and then there was the people that came after work. So the people that showed up like at 5:30, and the gym would typically close, I would say maybe like 6:30, 7 o'clock. We never stayed that late because we were like at the 3:30 crowd. Or sometimes we would come a little bit later as I got older to spar with people because there was nobody to spar if I came there at 3:30. And then in the summer, we would get there early and work out. So it would be like Tommy Hearns in there, Gerald McCullum, Michael Moore, my brother, myself, Tarek Salmasi, Obakar's dad, Eddie Carr, Walter Smith, which was the coach. Bill Miller was still there, Luther Burgess, and Sammy Poe. And those guys were coaches. And that's what it was. It was like at that time, there wasn't a lot of people, because some of the school kids, they were still used to coming in at 3:30 or they were on summer break. So it's like, well, we're not going to come to the gym. Or we did, you know what I mean? And that's kind of like, I grew up around all of them, had conversations with every single one of them. Everybody that I remember was super nice to me, even when, pro fighters came in, like George Foreman would come in because he had a fight at the Palace when he was coming back. Super nice guy. How he fit into a Porsche, I don't know, but super nice guy. I remember when I first met Klitschko, I think it was 97 or 98. I was like, oh my God, man. Like this guy was, to me, I'm 6'4". He was a giant to me, like just a big, massive person. And then when I met Lennox Lewis before I met Klitschko. And I shook Lennox Lewis' hand and I'm like, man, I got big hands, but he's just a giant, you know what I mean? And he was a super cool guy, really nice guy. But I think like the guy that was the friendliest out of everybody that I ever dealt with at Kronk was Dennis Andres. I don't know if you remember him or not.
Yeah, he
but
fought Thomas Hearns, didn't he? And he came to Kronk after
yes,
losing to
yes,
Hearns, wasn't he? Yeah.
yes,
And
yes. And
then did he not win a title as well after he lost it to Hearns? So
I
he
believe
came
so,
back
yeah.
with a
So he
title.
won one, then he lost
Yeah.
it to Hearns, and I think he won it again. But like I remember, he was like the nicest guy that there was at the gym, in my opinion. You know what I mean? Like there were other guys, whatever, that everybody, like I got along with everybody. I didn't have any problems with anybody. My brother got along with people. My dad got along with people. It was just nobody gave anybody shit. You get what I mean? Like in a bad way. Like we didn't think anything different of you because of where you come from, and I didn't think anything different of you because of where you came from. You know what I mean? And that was like a level playing field for Kronk because after you work out, you're all going to the locker room. You take off your pants the same way I take off my pants. You go take a shower the same way I take a shower. You go put on your clothes the same way I put on my clothes. I'm like, there ain't nothing special about you. You're just same like me. And and just hearing the stories. So, and I think that's the other thing is the stories. And I know that, you wanted to know a lot about, the fighters that were there, like like Gerald McCullum. Like I remember seeing him spar, JamesToney spar, like Jimmy Paul spar, or even people that came in, once in a while, like Chavez came in like once, I remember, or Holyfield came in a couple times to spar. And then Michael Moore at 170 at light heavyweight, like unbelievable, like unbelievable accuracy and timing and power. when like I would sit down, I would stop my workout and just sit down and watch him because guess what? Tall softball. And and just watch him and to me it was unbelievable like how well focused he was when he was at 175 pounds, light heavyweight, whatever. And like he looked like he was something that was chiseled out of stone at 100 and he could crack like crazy. And he knew he could, but he didn't do it. Like when he was in the ring, he would do it when he needed to, but and that's like one of the things, like I picked up a lot of stuff from watching everybody. And there's a quote that the best artists in the world are the best thieves. And as a fighter, that's what you need to do. Like you need to look at fighter A, fighter B, fighter C, see what they do really well. And this is something I learned from my dad. And take that little portion and see how you can implement it if you really like it. Take something from somebody else and see how you can implement it. Like the one thing that I still do when I still shadow box still today, nothing has changed. I learned from Thomas Hearns, when you get into the ring, accustom yourself with the ring. Don't throw a single punch in the first round. Maybe you throw 1 or 2 punches. Just work on your footwork, get comfortable with the ring. And like people don't think about that because when you get into shadow boxing, what's the first thing you want to do?
Some jabs.
Exactly. You want to throw some punches. And so one of the things that it helped me do, and it's still subconsciously today I will do it, is even when I sparred like up until maybe like 6 years ago, no matter what, I would be sparring with people, I would never put my back against the ropes. I would control the center of the ring. And that all comes from what I seen Thomas Hearns do when he would, shadow box. And if you watch like Tommy, like I'll use the fight against Duran, like how he controlled the center of the ring. Yeah, he might have been on the ropes a little bit, but look where Tommy was much more effective as a fighter wasn't when he was against the ropes or close to the ropes, when he was in the center of the ring. Think about if you've done any of his film studies and you look at where he's most effective, it's in the center of the ring. And that's like one of the things that I never thought about that's something I'm going to do. Is just something that I did. I'm like, well, that's a cool idea. Let's just warm up by, I just mimicked him. And that mimicking transferred into don't keep your back against the ropes. Because it teaches you to like subconsciously think about where the ropes are, where the corner is and stuff like that. And still to this day, like that's when I shadow box, I still do that. Like I shadow box 3-4 rounds before I work out. First round, no matter what. And people are like, why don't you throw no punches? I said, because I don't need to. I'm getting comfortable with the ring. And that's it. And, that's the important, and that's the beauty of like shadow boxing is like so much of what you do during shadow boxing will help you if you're consistent with it. Like, I think that's like a huge aspect that I don't remember if it's Frank, the boxing coach, or if it's Mustafa from Georgia, that they talk about you should shadow box like 12 rounds or whatever. I think that's a little excessive, unless that's all you're going to do, because I think burnout sets in for a human being. You know what I mean? Like I get the repetitive nature of things. I just think burnout will set in and you'll get kind of like diminishing results. 4 or 5 rounds of shadow boxing, I think is a good way to warm up. If all you're going to do is shadow box for like 4 or 5 rounds, go do something else, then come back and cool down with shadow boxing. And that's another thing like we did it also is, instead of jumping rope at the end of the workout, just go, lightly throw some punches, work on your jab, work on your defense, work on your defensive moves. Imagine somebody's in front of you, work on rolling, work on, just moving your shoulder, moving your head. And that's all stuff that I learned from like watching guys like Thomas Hearns, Joe McCullum, JamesToney, all those guys. Like it's just the consistency of just little things. Like James did this really good. James could fight off the ropes. James could fight in, really close distances. I never wanted to fight on ropes because it's not a good aspect for me. Could I fight on ropes? Yeah, I could, but why when it's not a strength for me? You know what I mean? So I think that's like the benefit of what I saw growing up and like what has helped me, be successful as an amateur, but also when I see somebody making a mistake or if I see somebody at the gym and they ask me for advice and all this, that's what I kind of tell them. I'm like, listen, man, you got to take this stuff slow. I says, because when you were a kid, you didn't learn how to walk in like a week. It took you some time. You know what I mean? And then you start running. I said, it's a process. And it's the same thing with boxing or any other sport, to be exact.
You have touched on this already. So you mentioned Floyd Logan, one of the coaches, and also your father, one of the coaches. So, well, the coaches in the Kronk Gym, what are the two that had the most impact on you, your boxing career?
So, so my dad had a massive impact on me. But I think that I can't just say like I can't just say like there's one coach because, like I said, like, the one thing that people, don't talk about is the stories that were told by like the coaches, like Walter Smith, which is an older guy. He was about Bill Miller's age. There was Bill Miller, there was Luther, and there was Sammy. And then there was Floyd, okay? But usually it would be a conversation between Walter, Bill Miller, and either Luther or Sammy Poe. So there would always be there would be a three-person conversation because if it was just Walt and Bill, it would turn into an argument. Like no, that's not how it happened. No, that's how I remember it happened. No, that's how I remember. And they're talking about boxing and when stuff happened during fights and things of that nature. And they would be arguing. No, I'm gonna go watch the film and I'm gonna tell you that's not how it happened. And they'd come back the next day. So there always had to be like a third person to be involved in that conversation. At least that's how I remembered it, to balance it out. So it wasn't me versus you. So when I look at it, I think each coach can have an effect on you. It could be positive, it could be negative. All right. And I'll get into like my coaching philosophy and how I look at coaching in a little bit. But I don't know what I technically learned from listening to all those conversations when Bill Miller would be talking about like Jersey Joe Walcott, and he'd be arguing with Walt Smith about him, or Sugar Ray Robinson, or they'd be arguing about Joe Louis and what he did and stuff like that. Like I don't know what I learned from it, but I know that it was enough that I still remember to this day, like them yapping at each other, educationally about this is what this guy did. No. This is what he did. This is what I remember I seeing him do. You know what I mean? And so that was the one aspect. But then it's the other thing is, they were more along the lines of telling somebody and not necessarily always showing somebody what to do. Emanuel, when he would show people, you know what I mean? So that was kind of a little bit different. Emanuel and Floyd Logan would show people like, this is what you need to do. Walt and Bill would show people, but he wouldn't be as active. And I get it. They were a little bit older, you know what I mean? And that's totally fine. But they could break down why you need to throw your jab at this time, why you need to throw your hook at this time, and this is why you need to do certain things. Like they could break that down to you. But for some people, unless you're experienced, you can't grasp that knowledge. You get what I mean? And that's why they focus more on the pros that were a little bit more established and things of that nature. But I think that the one coach that probably had the most impact on me outside of my dad was a guy named Ruben Flores. So Ruben Flores ran a boxing gym in Pontiac, Michigan called Azteca Boxing Gym. And he's the guy that took me to my first national championship because my dad couldn't go with me. And I still remember to this day, like the words that he said. He's like, you did everything to get here. You don't have to change anything that you have to change. Say, I'm just going to tell you when we're in the ring what you need to do that your dad already told you what to do and how you need to fight. And that's all he did. Like, he was super calm, whatever. He'd be like, take deep breaths, just keep him on the outside. He's trying to close distance on you. This is what you need to do. You know, he's like, just do what you do best, whatever. And like, then when I went with him the next year to a different national championship, the same national championship next year, he was there with me. And so I won my first national championship and he was there with me. And so, like, it was the same thing. It was like calm, collective, but he stepped it up a little bit more. He's like, listen, you need to do this, as opposed to, hey, let's just, you know what I mean? And I won my first national championship. So, like, you know, we spent a lot of time going there to get sparring. And it was, for us, it was probably like a 45, 50-minute drive to drive and, you know, go get sparring. And, you know, he had this one sign in his gym that I'll never forget. It says, a conditioned fighter will always beat an unconditioned fighter. And he had that sign, that plaque there. And then he had another one that says, just because you learned it doesn't mean you earned it. And I'm like, so like those things. And I remember like going there and sparring with his fighters and stuff like that. And because he had a good amateur program, and, you know, he had a lot of impact as me, you know, just, you know, not as much as my dad, because my dad's there like all the time. But I would have to say he probably had the second most amount of impact on me, you know, just because we spent a lot of time together. Like, we went to national tournaments together. He was in the car with us, or we all, you know, carpooled in the same 15-passenger van. We just stuffed 20 people in there, driving 18 hours to, you know, Georgia. So yeah. Yeah.
So as a coach yourself now, so what do you emphasize when working with aspiring boxers, and how do you pass on the knowledge? How do you pass on knowledge you've gained from Kronk and your experience
So
as a
I try
fighter?
and work on like one, maybe two things at a time. And so this is my whole coaching philosophy. All right. And it stems from a story or parable that I heard, and I may butcher it. So about 12,000 years ago, the gray wolf started to become what we know today as a domesticated dog. All right. And so in that story, there's the person that can raise a wolf to become something other than a gray wolf. And then there's the gray wolf that can either be raised to become something other than a wolf or something not. So when I think of coaching, I think of, you need to have the right person that can either groom you or help you or transfer what they know, that you can become an athlete. Because that's the first thing you need to become. You need to become an athlete and a student. And so I think of like that story. Not all gray wolves were able to be domesticated and become the protectors and friends of humans. And there's nothing wrong with that, because guess what? We still need gray wolves. But we needed something that could protect humans while we were developing. And that was a subsect of those gray wolves. But you also had a lot of people that were probably taking these gray wolves, and they weren't qualified to help them become protectors and friends of humans. So that's the other thing. Is it the problem the gray wolf, or is it the problem the person trying to help, you know, convert the gray wolf? And so that's how I look at coaching, is that it's a two-way street. You need the right mix of talent, athlete, person, and the right mix of patience, time, and consideration. Like, you can learn a lot, because there are coaches out there that knew nothing about boxing, but they have a teaching mentality, and they're able to, you know, pick up stuff and then teach people. And then you have other people that, just because you're a former fighter, doesn't mean you're going to be a great coach. Happens all the time. Like I use the example of, you never take the best salesperson and put him into a leadership role because he's the best salesperson because he's the best salesperson. That doesn't necessarily mean that that best salesperson is going to be the best person for leading, because they most likely have a selfish outlook at things and they only look at things through a small lens. All right. Whereas you have somebody that is able to teach people, cares about people, has a good experience with sales. You get what I mean? That they could become a great leader of a sales team. And that's kind of how I look at coaching. Is it's more than just being great at what the actual act is. You have to be able to transfer that and be able to not only transfer, but be able to reward somebody because they're making progress. And I think that's my philosophy when it comes to coaching. Is
It's a very different skill, isn't it? Being a coach as compared to being a fighter. A lot of fighters, maybe some things came easy to them. One of such
Yep.
great fighters. So when they try to transfer knowledge, it came so easy to them. So then they not always understand why it's not coming the same way for a fighter they try to train.
And yep. My dad he has that same struggle. Like he's like, I just don't understand why these kids can't pick up stuff as fast as you and your brother could. And I'm like, well, Dad, I said, you got to think we're around it all the time. You know what I mean? And my dad, although he helped my brother learn boxing and teach boxing, he wasn't my brother's first actual coach. It was a guy named Dave Shoulders. Dave Shoulders, who trained at Kronk as well, that was my brother's first coach, and then my dad had a conversation with another coach that was also a member of Kronk, but at a different location. His name was Anthony Nolan. And Anthony Nolan said, if you don't like the way that he's training him, why don't you just start, taking it under your wing and you start training him? He's like, because no one else is going to give your kid time as much as you can give him time. No one else is going to give him as much attention as you can give him attention. Because Dave Shoulders isn't going to come to your house and tell your son to run. Dave Shoulders isn't going to come to your house and tell your son, hey, we should go downstairs and hit the pads for like 5-10 minutes. You know what I mean? And so I think that's like the big thing of when it comes to coaching, a lot of the successful guys that have built fighters up have been like a father figure to those fighters. Like you think about it, like a lot of them have been father figures to them, because either A, they lacked a father figure, or B, they were just in their lives all the time. And that makes a big difference. I don't remember, somebody posted something that's like, you'll never be able to out hustle a good father as a coach that has a good fighter as a coach. You won't be able to do it because that father is there for his son 24/7, whereas your coach is there when you're in the gym or when you're, running track or whatever it is. He's getting 24/7, attention from his dad. Now, that could be good, that could be bad, because, it could be overdone. But I always think of, like, Mayweather, and I think of
Roy Jones Jr. His
Roy
father,
Jones. But no, I also think of, like, Lomachenko.
Joe Calzaghe as well. Yeah, Lomachenko.
Yeah, Joe Calzaghe as well. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, your dad is, like, there's a saying that nobody wants to say, is that your dad is the only man on this planet that wants to see you succeed. Everybody else does not want to see you succeed. Your dad, whatever his faults are, wants to see you succeed. Most other people don't want to see you succeed.
And your dad wants you to be more successful than he was.
Exactly. Yep. So.
Yes, interesting. So how has the world of boxing evolved since your competitive days? And what are your thoughts on those changes?
Everybody wants to learn everything. Everybody wants to be Jake Paul. Everybody wants to, become great within a few minutes, and it's just not happening.
Yeah, that's
That
what we were
people don't.
discussing before, wasn't it?
Yeah, people just
On
don't
shortcuts.
value the work and the amount of time that goes into becoming great at something. They just don't, and it's like the money aspect. That's the other thing that I think has drastically changed. And I'll use two examples. I'll use Jake Paul as an example. Whatever you want to say about him, I'm not questioning his work ethic. I'm not questioning what he can do. But without the money that he has or had, he would not be able to put himself in a position where he could buy and pay for the coaching that he has had. He would not be able to be put in a position to buy and pay for the gym that he has in Puerto Rico and the time that he can spend with all of these fighters that are coming into his gym and sparring with him either at full blast or half blast. So now think about that. How does a kid that doesn't have money compete with that? You can have all the hard work ethic in the world. You're not going to be Jake Paul. Because you don't have that money aspect behind you that can get you the best amount. And that's and it's not just with boxing, it's with other sports as well that we see this. But I'll also use on the women's side, there's a former power lifter. Her name is Dr. Steffi Cohen. And I don't know how this showed up like in my Instagram feed a while ago. And she's a former power lifter, and she started training at Mundo's boxing gym. And I can't remember the guy's name right now. He's a former Cuban boxing coach. So he was the coach against Johansen Martinez, the guy that I fought at the finals at the 1999 Pan American Games. That was his coach. Him and Dr. Salazar were the coaches. And so that guy, he left Cuba. He came to Miami. He runs a boxing gym in Miami. He's trained a handful of fighters. I think he's worked with Rigondeaux, if I'm not mistaken. Could
Okay.
be mistaken, but I think he's worked with Rigondeaux. So that guy, he started training her. And so, unless you're a pro fighter, you're not getting in his gym. I mean, they may have an after school program. I highly doubt it. You get what I mean? Like his gym is built for pro fighters. So she has a massive influence. She could bring people into his gym. So that's the other thing is, I'm not saying that she's super wealthy like Jake Paul, but she has enough money that most people that are involved in boxing do not have. And so it opens another door for people to enter that are narrowing the pathway for other people to walk down that pathway. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's the effect of social media, really, isn't it?
It's not only social media, it's just think of, and I don't know how it is in the UK, like if you want to learn how to play soccer, okay? So I know, I'm sorry, football, not soccer, football. So if you want to learn how to play football, I don't know the process that it is there. So here, if you want to learn how to play, football here, you have to pay somebody to learn how to play it. The whole aspect of getting a bunch of kids, like what I remember, we're going to get a bunch of kids together. We're going to go to the park. We're going to kick the ball around. We're going to watch it on TV. We're going to go and we're going to do this. All right. So what's happened with a lot of the sports is that everything has been influenced by business, and baseball is a fantastic example of this. So baseball here in the States, you had Little League. And then sometime, I don't know, maybe 20, 25 years ago, travel baseball came about. Well, travel baseball, you have to pay. And it's sold on the notion that the more that you play, the better that you get. And the better that you get, the better opportunity you'll have to go to a better high school, a better college, and your better chance of making it to the major leagues. If that's the truth, why is it that over 50% of the major league players are not from the United States? And that same thing, I think, is happening to boxing right now. Like, it's becoming, you're having an advent of there are no more rec centers that are like, I'll use Detroit as a perfect example. There were 10 rec centers that all had boxing gyms. I think there's one rec center or maybe two that have a boxing gym left in them still to today that are open. Everything else got shut down because Detroit went bankrupt. So now think, you lost 80% or 70% of the boxing gyms here. How is another boxing gym gonna, come, how's it gonna open? You need private funding or you need people to pay for it to be operated. And I know that we have an after school program and a boxing gym here that does that, but it's all privately funded. But like, if you're a regular old Joe and you want to learn how to box, it's very difficult to do what I did or my teammates did in the 80s or in the 90s or in the early 2000s. It's very difficult to do.
Yeah, I think maybe I might be wrong, but life feels like it's moving faster now, whereas people don't. I don't want to say they don't want to help, but it's like money is more the driving factor now. So I'm not going to help someone for free. I'm going to have to be paid for it because my time is invaluable.
Yep. And
Not
and
going.
so
So the kids
and
aren't
that's
missing
like,
out.
so this is the other thing. And I'm guilty of it because like I used to work with like amateur fighters with my dad and stuff like that. And I'd be like, okay, I'll help you guys out. I have no problem. But then when it becomes to, all right, let's go for a run, you don't want to listen to me. Let's go do this. This is what we need to do. Like, listen, there's, like I said, like it has to be a healthy balance. If you think you're going to come into the gym and you're going to try and tell me what to do, or you're going to argue with me that I can't do this, yes, you can do it. There is no I can't, unless you have some physical disability, you can. And so that is like the biggest thing that I've seen is the whole I can't do this, and we can go down the rabbit hole of how people raise their children and stuff like that, but we're not going to do
Things
that.
have changed.
Things
Things have
have
changed
definitely
definitely.
changed
Yeah.
where you're trying to empower people at a very young age to make their own decisions, and that's fine. But when you're dealing with somebody that knows something way more than you do and they're a specialist at it, you shouldn't argue with them because they're just trying to help you out. And if you don't want their help, don't argue with them. Just don't come to the gym, And so, even with like sports, there's a lot of kids that are forced into sports that don't want to play sports. And then when they get to the age of 12, 13, 14, puberty is soaring through their veins. It's like, well, I don't need to listen to you anymore. This and that. They get attracted to girls, or the girls get attracted to boys, and then they lose interest in sports because they were forced into it. And it's like, you got kids today that are playing 4 different sports because that's the only way you're going to get athleticism. It's like, no, you don't need to do 4 different travel teams. You know what I mean? And the only way you can do 4 different travel teams is if you have a lot of money to pay for those travel teams, because people that come from lower income are not able to do that, and you're skewing the population of who can and who cannot compete, like in sports in general. And that's why I think you have so many people that come from other countries and play sports here because they play for the love of the game and for the, how can I say, they have heart in the game. They bought into it as opposed to being forced. They love it because they love it. They don't love it because they bought it. That would be my explanation. Yeah. And that's the biggest thing that's changed. It's like you can't keep a gym open if you don't have money. So you have to charge people. And a lot of times what will happen is sometimes you're spending more time in the gym than you are with your family. And now that creates a whole different dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah, you're definitely right. Okay, so going back to your boxing, Could you describe some of the unique challenges tall boxers face in the ring and how you overcame them?
I think the number one thing that everybody tells every short fighter to do when they're fighting a tall person is just rush them.